So in the past 10 or 15 years, car manufacturers have really increased their quality. And there's quality in different ways, noise and vibration, gas mileage, they're trying to cut weight. So some of the ways they've been doing that is to tighten up the door gaps, tighten up their tolerances.
I will say that today's vehicles are built much better and tighter than they've ever been before. So it makes, from a repair standpoint, some people think, well, now I got to get it down to this tolerance. Well, the problem before was we were always looking at getting it to a 3 or 5 millimeter tolerance in some areas, and the problem was it wasn't there to begin with from the manufacturer.
The tolerances have become tighter and tighter and will continue to become tighter as the manufacturing processes change. So where typically years ago people were putting things back together plus or minus 5, it's now down to plus or minus 3, plus or minus 2, plus or minus 1, depending on the vehicle manufacturer. And some even less than 1 millimeter.
All cars are built to a lot tighter tolerances today than they used to be. You're not seeing the 7, 8, 9 millimeters of tolerance in the builds of anything anymore.
But the tolerance typically is determined from the first measurements that you take on the bottom of the vehicle. If I have a real tight center section, that tells me that the rest of the car is probably going to be built that way when we start to look at the bottom of the vehicle.
What we will find on some vehicles, and sometimes if they're manufactured in different locations, you're going to have some different measurements from one vehicle to another, or you get different reference points on the vehicle that we would look at and say, okay, these are symmetrical on both sides, but when you measure another vehicle, those points aren't even on there. So from one manufacturer to another, even on the same make and model, you might have different holes in some cases.
I think when you look at tolerance on a vehicle, you need to be looking at the PLPs, the principal locating points that the manufacturer uses when they manufacture the vehicle. Those will all typically be tight tolerance points. Whether their tolerance is plus or minus 3 or whether their tolerance is plus or minus 1. Those are the key locations that most manufacturers, including ourselves, use when we're creating data sheets.
Manufacturers look at two things when building a vehicle. They look at a tolerance per point, and they look at an overall tolerance for that vehicle. So meaning that you may have a 1 millimeter tolerance per point, but if you add that up over 20 points, that doesn't mean you can have a tolerance of 20 millimeters. Right? So if you're dealing with a height measurement and you've got a 3 millimeter tolerance, you can't have one rail that's down 3 millimeters and one rail's up 3 millimeters. Now you have a 6 millimeter difference between right side and left side. So what we're looking at is not just having 3 millimeters within spec, but also a 3 millimeter tolerance from right side to left side for height, length, and width. Because otherwise that tolerance begins to become very large from right side to left side. Even though you're within 3 of spec, you're not within 3 from right side to left side. So those are the two things that we're trying to achieve. And being symmetrical is just as important as getting it back within 3 of tolerance.
The tolerance starts to rise the farther you get from the bottom of the vehicle, and that's only because how the vehicle is fixtured and built when it's manufactured. If I have a uniside built vehicle, I'm obviously going to have a tighter tolerance vehicle, because in a uniside I'm taking the whole side of the vehicle and I'm bringing it up to that rooftop all as one piece. I'm not bringing in multiple parts in order to build that vehicle.
Tolerance today, kind of going away in the sense that we used to say. We used to have generic, 3 millimeters on unibody vehicles and 5 millimeters on full frame stuff. And that's really not applicable anymore. Tolerance is point specific.